So while we're waiting for others, we should get some notes takers. Looking for volunteers. Well, it's 1 after. Should we get started? Nancy, you there? Okay, well, I will kick it off and we can get started. So thanks everybody for joining the virtual interim for RATS. This is being recorded, and just a reminder in terms of the note well that I think everyone's familiar with the IP rules for this meeting, so they apply. And we're going to jump into the agenda. I guess first off, we need to get volunteers to take notes, otherwise we can't hold the meeting. And looks like Nancy's trying to get unmuted. Anybody able to take notes for us today?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Good.
Although your microphone icon says it's muted, so I don't know how we're hearing you if you're muted.
I don't know, my microphone says it's unmuted.
Okay,
my voice is still a little shaky.
Yeah.
Testing mine. Is that better?
Yep.
You're coming.
So still looking for volunteers to take notes, and then we can move on.
Ned, did you post the link for the? Sorry, my brain is still foggy. For the notes.
It's you can use the note-taking tool if you want.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If you can post the link on the chat.
Yeah. So Carl's got it. Is that Carl? Does that mean you can take notes for us? can get one more volunteer. I don't know. Guy Federico, can you take notes?
No, we can't hear you, Carl.
This is Russ. I will help take notes.
Okay, thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Russ.
Okay, so back to the agenda. We basically have two items on the agenda. One is to review what we think are potentially the EAT blocker list. The chairs went through the archive and found issues that potentially are blockers. Maybe they're not. Maybe they've been addressed already. But we're going to just want to go through that list, and then we have 5 minutes for an update on the milestones, and then 5 minutes for open mic time. Are there any changes to the agenda that anybody wants to propose?
Yeah, I put together a presentation, like a status update presentation. Was that on the agenda for you to present?
It's not on the agenda. If we have time, we can go through that.
Oh, you requested me to put that together, right? So
we're looking for just a list of blockers, not a status update. So we have that list here. We'll just go through the list that we have.
okay. I mean, the status update is just it's kind of related in that way, but okay.
Yeah, maybe we get through the list quickly and we have some time for that. Okay. So if you're anyone that's been,
you know, to be clear, the point is to address the blockers. That's what the presentation is about. It's not anything else. I don't know if you looked at it or not, but
I did look at it, and I think it makes sense to just work through the mail archive so that we can be focused on what's there, what the threads are, and we can all work from that context, if that's okay.
Yes. Yep. And just to add to that, Lawrence, I'm sure you'll have some comments to add as the chairs take consensus. And so it would be important to hear your comments as well as everyone else's, just so that the working group understands that there's a fair process and that the chairs are assessing consensus. So that's why Ned will lead this. Thank you. We appreciate your work.
Okay, so everyone's on the same page. There was an email that was posted to the list on September 9th, which is titled "Possible Blocking Issues for EAT Working Group Last Call," and there's basically just there's a numbered listing of items that had been posted to the list, and we wanted to go through that list and assess consensus. So if you can open up that window and bring that message up, that would be helpful. So the first on our list has to do with UEID uniqueness guarantee. This was from our security director review.
Excuse me, Ned, could you project the list as you're looking at it so we can tell where you are? Thanks.
Yeah. Stop sharing, so hang on. So how does this work? People see what I'm sharing? Okay. So there's if you follow the link, then it'll take you into the document there, and it's basically broken down into paragraphs. So about the fourth paragraph, let's see, fifth paragraph down, there's a discussion about the UEID guarantee, and the question here is, the document seems to imply that relying parties need a guarantee that the UEID is unique. There's an appendix that purports to calculate the collision probability of the UEID based on the number of bits. The calculation only makes sense if the UEIDs are chosen with uniform randomness. The onus is apparently on the entire manufacturer, on the entity manufacturer, and the probability of this being done correctly is lower than the chance of collision if it were done correctly. So that was the feedback, and the assessment here is that, do we think that this is still an issue? Can we essentially disposition it, or do we need to rely on some other approach? And Lawrence pointed out in the response to this list that he says that the UAD is something we have to live with unless we rely entirely on registry-based IDs. So is this still an issue? Are we okay with this dispositioning? More importantly, is it a blocker?
Yeah, it's Guy. This seems like a common way to solve this problem, right? This doesn't seem controversial to me.
Okay. Other opinions? Does that sound right?
It sounds right to me. I have no problem with the UUID.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the next one has to do with self-asserted claims. So this is so the summary is that the document says that the entity may make security claims about itself. Another entity can sign those claims. A third entity can verify the signature. It's difficult to fathom the expected use environment, though. Why should a third party assume that the signer is trustworthy? Why is it trustworthy for evaluating the claims for the first party? What are the responsibilities of the signer? How does the relying party let the other parties know what attributes it needs? And how are these trust relationships discovered, maintained, updated, revoked, etc.? So that was the concern. So Lawrence replied to that and said, we believe that we have addressed this in draft 15 by making strong reference to RATS architecture early in the document, so readers unfamiliar know how claims are asserted. So the question is, are the issues that are being brought up, are they completely addressed by the RATS architecture, or is there something else that's not addressed? And it starts out with asserting a concern about the idea that a claim can be self-asserted. And so do we think that the architecture document completely addresses that? I guess is the question.
There's a comment in the chat from Dave.
Oh, okay.
And this makes sense. He's having a hard time following the issues without seeing the text on the screen. So could we go to the text that describes the issue to help the discussion?
Okay.
Thank you.
Did you want to speak? It sounds like you're, oh, you dropped.
Okay. So here's the email. I'll highlight this part of the text that is generating that issue.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. I just tried to reset my browser. So now, thank you for sharing that part. But I was kind of responding to Ned. You're asking, do we doc the review was on draft 13, and I don't know how to answer that. Do we think that it is fine without having the text that changed between 13 and 15 on the screen? That's what I meant to be talking about. And so that's what I don't know. I've not seen Lawrence's slides. I don't know if that's actually what was in Lawrence's presentation, but I don't know how to answer your question is what I'm trying to say,
Okay. Ned. So Lawrence, do you have that in your presentation? Or can you respond to Dave's comment?
Yeah, so I mean, my take, EAT isn't really doing anything in terms of trust of claims that's not in RATS architecture. It's not, it's not saying there are self-asserted claims, and it's really fully in line with RATS architecture. So my perception of what happened here with this comment was I think Hillary wasn't familiar with RATS architecture. So that's why, she asked all of these questions. All that I did.
Did you follow up with her and verify that, or is that an assumption we're making?
It's an assumption. Okay. I did write a response to this when the comments came out, and I probably said something like that, and I never received any response back from her. So the change in the text is simply to point out very early on and very clearly that the whole basis of trust for attestation is described in RATS architecture, not in the EAT document.
Okay, so given that there were changes between 13 and 15, does it make sense for the work group to review that again and agree that the wording that's in the EAT document is aligned with the wording that's in the RATS architecture, and that addresses this concern? Maybe we can take that as a to be followed up item, unless there's other opinions here.
All the EAT document says is basically it's one sentence, maybe two. What I just said. The EAT document doesn't discuss the attestation trust model. See the RATS architecture.
Okay.
So it's just a reference. There's not even. I wouldn't think there's an alignment issue there.
Okay. So I'm going to move on. So there's also
a question. I know I just looked at the data tracker, and draft 15 has not been.
Your audio's breaking up. couldn't hear you. Try it again. I think so. Try it again.
I want that can be posted to the chat. That's the diffs between 15 and 13, just to make it easy for us to only look at the deltas.
Is that something you have, Lawrence?
No.
Or Carl? We can certainly do it, after the meeting. I don't know. It doesn't sound like we can do it.
From the
Well,
data
while
tracker.
you guys talk, I can try and do it. Sorry, my voice is cutting up. Just give me a couple minutes.
You can get the data tracker to do it for you under the history tab.
Even
But
for
the problem, Russ, is that you can't, because draft 15 isn't posted. If 15 is posted, you can do that. But right now, if you want the diffs between the GitHub editor's copy and the 13 posted one, then you can't get that from the data tracker.
You can by giving it the URL if it's anywhere.
Ah, okay. There may be a way to do that. All right, great. Maybe Nancy can do that. Thank you.
Okay, so while Nancy's working on that, let's go to the next item. So this is so further down, there's a question about the security level claim, and this also appears. This issue appears further down on the list as well. Basically, the question is, the concern is there's no clear meaning about about security level, and that the three possible values, low, medium, and high, seem vague. And but Lawrence replied to the email for item number 3, saying that security level is being removed in draft 15. So is that the right resolution? So certainly it removes it from the list. So any discussion on that?
Looks like a good thing. Thanks, Lawrence.
Okay, so the next one has to do with a format versus protocol. Excuse my voice. So the last little bit here. So the document asserts that it defines a network protocol for proving trustworthiness to a relying party. I'm not sure that this is a protocol. Rather, it appears to be a format. And so I guess there's potentially wording that uses the word protocol or asserts that there's a protocol involved in the EAT draft. And so the clarification here is that this was addressed in draft 14, but there's other improvements planned for 15. So can you speak more to that? What other improvements, and what was done in 14 and what is planned for 15, Lawrence, or one of the other?
Yeah, so this text is a minor sentence in like Appendix C in the discussion of EAT in relation to IEEE, I don't remember the number, 802, or is it the TCG standard? One of the not DICE, it's the other one. I'm not remembering. I'm sorry. So. And it was just, the text is not normative or part of the introduction or anything like that. And I believe the text is revised to say, EAT defines a message format for conveying claims to a relying party now. And like I said, it's not. It's just part of an appendix of trying to, compare and contrast EAT to another protocol or another scheme, attestation scheme.
So, so you're saying that comparison still exists in the latest draft?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's comparison to EAT or to IEEE 802.1 AR and dev ID.
Okay, which is a certificate format as opposed to a protocol.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that EAT does define a well, it's not really, I think we can't really call EAT a protocol. I don't think that's right. I think he's right. The comment is accurate in that it's not a protocol. So
okay.
I've switched to calling it a message format, and also don't say anything about proving trustworthiness to a relying party right now. I think it's much softened there, and the point of that paragraph is just the compare and contrast. So it's not trying to be definitive about what EAT does or what about trustworthiness. And in fact, I never used the word trustworthiness, as I can accidentally used it this time.
Okay. All right. So so maybe the resolution is to do a compare the diffs and make sure that the new language is appropriate.
So the sentence quoted, and I think is it Hillary is the first name of Foreman?
Hillary, yeah.
So I think the sentence that Hillary quotes, where it talks about a network protocol for proving, that was changed in draft 14, because I'm looking at draft 14 right now, to a message format for proving. So this protocol isn't there, but the sentence that I copied into text is in the next, is like 2 paragraphs down below that, which still says it defines a network protocol. And so as long as the second sentence is changed to the first sentence in terms of format or message format or whatever, defines a message format instead of a network protocol, that would be consistent. If that's in draft 15, then I think draft 15 will be fine, but I've not seen 15 yet. So I'm just saying it's not fixed in 14. It's only half fixed in 14, I should say.
Okay.
One place is fixed, thank you, and the other place is not. So.
Okay. And Nancy says in text she can't see a 15. So apparently there isn't a 15 available in GitHub yet either.
Yeah, so let me clarify that.
Okay.
All right. I mean, that was. Can I clarify?
Sounds like we need to look for changes in 15 that completes the change that was described.
Yeah, can I make a comment on draft 15?
Sure.
So, I mean, this was the bulk of my presentation. We're about halfway through, or maybe 3/4 of the way through, constructing draft 15. So some of the changes are in GitHub for these things, and some of them are planned. And probably draft 15 is going to be published around the end of the month. I mean, I suppose we could publish one sooner if you wanted to. It's probably in shape to publish a 15 now, if that's what you want.
Yeah, ideally, we can disposition, understand what the blockers are and have them taken care of in the next draft or the following draft. Okay, so those were the 4 issues that that the chairs could glean from Hillary Orman's feedback. Then the next feedback was from the IoT directorate, and so I've got a list of those. or a link to the issues that were raised there, and so I think they're pretty much in order. So basically, this text on section 7 for profiles came up, and so we can sort of read through this, but the summary is basically at a high level. You know, are profiles really the direction that the working group wants to head with this? Because it seems like that opens the door for a lot of sort of non-interoperability. So that is, I know that the group has discussed profiles in the past, and it seems as though there was a consensus that profiles were necessary. But it seems as though that we're lacking in being able to describe that in such a way that other readers are able to capture that, you know, why they're necessary. And so I don't think we've yet addressed this question of interoperability. Dave has his hands up.
We need to see if my mic will work. Yeah. So I don't really agree with Elliot here about countercultural to the IETF. There are other popular examples of where the IETF does define a framework that there are protocols for, profiles for. An example is the Précis framework, which is where you have interoperability profiles that are used for different things, like a profile for passwords, a profile for usernames, and that type of stuff, as well as the ability for you to create additional profiles for other specific cases. I see each as being very similar to that. And so I think it's perfectly fine for the working group to take a position just like the Précis working group chose to do. Now, of course, the interoperability is at the level of the profile, not at the level of each, right? Just because two things have each doesn't mean that you're interoperable, right? The profile does. And so it just means that, yes, we need some good profiles, you know, where we have some profiles, right? TP has one. I think there's at least 3 profiles that have been discussed in this working group already. So in that sense, you know, I don't think that Elliot's concern is really warranted in terms of being countercultural to the IETFs. That's the part I disagree with. It does mean that we got to have good interoperable profiles. That's all I'm saying. So.
And should that be addressed in the EAT draft or someplace else?
Well, it certainly should be addressed someplace else in profile documents. I don't know if we need anything else in the EAT document. In there, and probably Lawrence has looked, but I haven't looked to say, is there already some sentence that says EAT by itself doesn't, you know, something that means, doesn't have to say it this way, that means EAT by itself doesn't guarantee interoperability. Interoperability is at the level of a unique profile, and so each profile should be should have all the you know, mandatory stuff. I think it's in there right now, but I have to go back and verify. But when I looked at the EAT document, and I'm familiar with profiles and what needs to be interoperable, and this didn't jump out at me as a problem. I don't know if there's some wording that could be improved someplace that would help Elliot.
And so Lawrence mentioned that there were changes in draft 14 and that there are a plan for improved wording in 15. Is that correct, Lawrence?
Yes. One thing I want to point out is that the variability in the protocol, or the variability in EAT, is actually the same variability that exists in CWT. It's not really that different. And what EAT did is introduce a profile mechanism to deal with that variability. Note that COSE, which is used by CWT, actually does already mention the whole concept of profiles, and OSCORE is a profile of COSE. So we're already in the profile world just because we're using COSE. The text in 14 tries to explain a lot of this background of like why there's variability and you know, that he has chosen to have a profile mechanism to address it. The text in 15 will introduce EAT more as a framework for defining attestation token formats and less the definition of a specific attestation token format.
Michael Richardson has his hand up.
So I guess, Lawrence, you've just explained to me why I have a problem with profiles. If EAT has the same level of profile and variability as COT, then I'm not sure what the EAT document actually does at that point, right? We could just write profiles and refer to COT, and we wouldn't need a document in between. And so that's the problem I have. I really would like to see the profiles much less emphasized. I want to see the majority of the common claims well defined in this document, such that in most cases we would have, you know, a 3 or 4 sentence profile in something. And the way that I'm seeing is that people are going to have to write 4 to 10 page long profiles in their documents to do this. And I see this as a some claims seem to just be sitting on the fence. They're not saying anything specific for that. And that's what I would like to remove, right? I would like to remove I would like the claims to be very, very semantically clear. And if they're not clear enough that they can be reused, then maybe they don't belong there. And that's my problem. I just don't want to see you know, we went through this with X509 and X509 V3 and then PKIX and then PKIX for IPsec and that still doesn't interoperate. The 5 layers of profiling, right? So I don't want to see that happen again.
Dave Taylor's on the queue.
Yeah, Dave Taylor. So I've written a neat profile. It's in the TEEP working group. And like I said, I think we actually have 3 different profiles that are in documents that have been sent around to the RATS list. I think PSA is one, and I think there's a third one which escapes me right now. The one that we did in TEEP is basically 1 page in a larger document. Okay. And when I wrote it, I found what's in the EAT document around EAT profiles and claims to be very useful. It's exactly what I wanted, because it let me do it in only 1 page by saying, here's a bunch of claims that you can use in profiles, so I don't have to not have to define any claims. I only had to answer the questions that it says profiles have to answer to create a profile. So in that sense, I gave it a big thumbs up as far as what it said you had to do in profiles and giving sufficient building blocks to construct a profile out of. And so I did not have any negative feedback there, only that it had exactly what I was looking for. That's my feedback, so thanks.
Lawrence is on the queue.
Yeah, Michael, just to clarify a couple things there. So CWT doesn't have any profiles. It doesn't define a profile or anything like that. But CWT does have variability in it, in that you can use different kinds of CBOR encoding. It has variability in different types of COSE security, you know, algorithms, encryption or not encryption, sign versus sign 1. And CWT has variability in which claims are included or required or not required. That variability is all there. So I am with you on the idea that the claims, individual claims, should be very clear, and that there shouldn't be any variability in the individual claims that requires a profile to sort out. But a major part of the reason that there are profiles in EAT is because of the variability in CBOR and the variability in COSE and the variability in which claims can exist and which don't exist. There's also the fact that EAT includes JSON and GWT, and there's some variability there.
So is there, maybe just to make a suggestion, if we have text that describes the opportunity for having interoperability without a profile, if that exists, sort of as a least common denominator approach, does it make sense to focus on that in the description of profiles in that section? In other words, focus on where interoperability can happen without the need for a profile, if that is the case, and then explain the cases where it makes sense to introduce profiles. And I don't know if you're planning on wording like that, or that that's something that's already there or planned for 15. But it seems like that there is an interoperability. There is a potential for interoperability without a profile, but that hasn't really been described well.
I don't think there's an opportunity for interoperability without a profile in EAT. I mean, for exactly the reason Lawrence just explained.
Okay. So in the case where somebody uses the claims as described, as Lawrence described, that if you just use those claims, that's still not a chance for interoperability?
No, because one side, for example, just take one of the many axes that Lawrence just walked us through. One side could say, I'm going to support CWTs, and the other side says, I'm going to support JWTs. You have no interoperability, right? That's just one of like 10 different axes that's in there, right? So you got to say which one or ones of those is mandatory to implement, right? Because it says there's multiple options, right? You can do CWT or JWT or both, right? And same thing for each of the other different axes that's in the profile section. And so that's the point of a profile, is to say, so basically it's a set of recipes. The document is a set of recipes for how you build profiles. Here's a bunch of standard claims you can use, right? So every profile doesn't have to redefine the same ones just because you're going to pick this 5 and the other one's going to pick 3 of those plus 2 of the other ones, or whatever it is, or someone that's going to make one mandatory that was optional in another profile, whatever it is, right? And then here's the set of axes around, CWT and COSE and CBOR and things. You're going to choose what makes sense for your scenario, and then that becomes the profile, right? So it's basically a cookbook for creating profiles. That's what the EAT spec is right now. At least that's how I see it.
Okay.
Yeah, this would have been early design decisions. So this is where Elliot, pointed out that problem, because the IETF has traditionally favored the other model where we do have an MTI and a base set of, what's required. Because that has been shown to have more higher levels of adoption. But here we are.
Curious on the
sorry, I guess I'll put my hand up and you can call on me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I mean, he's not on the call to defend himself, but I think one of the things that Elliot did not acknowledge, and I mean, particularly this is with respect to the underlying specifications that he builds upon. CWT is an RFC. It was approved. It was approved in the ACE working group, which is authentication for constrained environments. So from a practical perspective, a spec was approved as an RFC that had all claims as totally optional, and the claim set was in theory infinitely extensible. So and that's simply not going to work for constrained environments. So I think, I think we're trying, I believe the comment ultimately boils down to asking EAT to fix an issue that the underlying spec did not, at least one of the underlying specs did not. And I can make the same thing for JOTS too, but I think I can just focus on COTS because ironically it was approved in a working group that is focused on IoT products. And from a practical perspective, it's not feasible for a large class of IoT receivers to design to be designed to accept a token that's infinitely extensible and every claim is optional. So I think that should also be kind of considered when taking Elliot's comment into account. I think he was viewing EAT in a vacuum rather than the underlying specs that EAT builds upon.
Right, that's insightful. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Gary, and sorry for trying to jump in. So just to comment, I don't think that RATS in the early design decisions made any wrong choices as far as doing EAT and profiles as a direction. I think I did exactly the right thing. I think I can point to other examples of IETF working groups that followed exactly the same process that RATS followed for the same reasons, right? So if you think about DHC, right, DHCP options, right? You think about PRACE that I mentioned before. You think about TAPS and so on. The point is, once you have cases that there's many different heterogeneous use cases, then you can either say, I'm going to develop a solution for every single use case that's different, and then I have 15 different solutions, or I can define a framework with a set of options and then profiles that can do that, right? So exactly the way that EAT works here with profiles, you could argue that it's the same way that things like, DHCP options work for implementations, although they may have a less formal notion of profiles, and they could have done better there, granted, but that was a long time ago. PRACE followed this, so I think it's doing the right thing. I think that EAT is done correctly. The document is organized correctly as far as defining a framework for profiles. Of course, we're not going to get interoperability until we also standardize profiles, right? So it's really, I think we should get this one done and then get profiles done as soon as possible. At least one, maybe two, maybe three, whatever it is, because that's really where you start getting interoperability. But I don't think there's anything wrong in what RATS or EAT did as far as defining profiles. So that's the part I disagree with Elliot on, and I think it is IETF culture when you try to have solutions that can be tailored to many different use cases that it actually does do profiles. It really depends. It may be rarer than the one just do a single one, but that's because most of the time more homogeneous, meaning one use case or a small number that you vary with musts or shoulds or whatever, as many different cases. Terminology until we came up with there's really these three roles or whatever. The point is there's so many different things already out there, and it's still early in innovation. There may be more, and so we really needed a cookbook here, and that's the same kind of approach that like PRACE had when dealing with that. So I'm just trying to defend. I don't see any problem here other than just email addressing to Elliot, maybe following up offline. I don't see, other than perhaps a sentence in the top of the profiles one that I just sent. So I'll see the time.
Yeah, in my view, CWT has all the same interoperability issues that EAT does. It just doesn't, it's just not honest about it, or it's not upfront about it. It has all the same variability and interoperability issues. I mean, two CWTs are not guaranteed to interoperate because they might use different crypto algorithms or different CBOR encoding. So what EAT did is kind of took the interoperability bull by the horns here, and it was very clear that there are interoperability issues inherited from CWT and proposed a solution. And so the decision about profile or no profile, well, really what really happened was the decision to use CWT and COSE and CBOR. That's where the interoperability issues root from, and then EAT made the decision to add profiles to kind of wrestle with that issue, or provide some solution to that issue.
So maybe Dave's suggestion is to add a line or two that brings that thought into the document more clearly.
There's paragraphs in 14 to explain that.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on unless there's more to say about it. And we're not going to get through the list. It looks like we have about 5 minutes left, if that. But let's try and get at least one more item here. So the section 4.1, so referring to the nonce claim, he's saying the nonce must have 64 bits of entropy, as fewer bits are unlikely to be secure. A maximum nonce size set to limit the memory required for an implementation. There are two sides to this equation: the generator of the nonce and the consumer. How's the generator supposed to know how much memory the consumer has? And so Lawrence mentioned in his email to the list that Elliot missed the text that addresses this when he made his comment. The text has been there since draft 9. Can you summarize what the text is saying here that addresses his concern, Lawrence?
Yeah, it does a calculation of the maximum size and says what the maximum size that the receiver needs to handle is.
And that calculation addresses his concern about the generator and the consumer and the generator are able to agree on how much memory is needed?
I think so.
Okay, so maybe this is just a response to Elliot that explains this and points to the other sections that describe it.
Yeah, I've provided that response to Elliot already.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to take a pause here and ask Nancy if it makes sense to do milestones now, or do we want to maybe take a few more minutes to do one more issue?
Let's do one more issue because I can literally just put the milestones up and spend less than 5 minutes if needed.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one, having to do with UIDs or variable length. So Elliot asserts that all implementations must be able to receive UIDs that are 33 bytes long. No UID longer than 33 bytes should be sent. I don't understand the parenthetical, which I'm not, which is basically asserting that between section 421 and 422, there's a particular use case that he's not understanding, where it says if a system integrator resells a bunch of components that have been tied together, what guidance is given as to which UEID or SUEID should be exposed, and for what purpose does the consumer consume a full array of each of these things? What's the intent? So it sounds like it's just the example. His concern is with the example, but it's not understandable. So beyond the math, so Lawrence's feedback was, well, Elliot's math is wrong, but even if the math is corrected, that there still seems to be a question around, is the example wording clear enough?
I did make some, yeah, you're right that there is the issue beyond the math, and I know I did make some improvements in the wording around SUEID to address that comment. I don't have them off the top of my head, but they are in draft.
In 14 or 15?
14.
Okay. All right. So any more conversation on that? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to talk about milestones.
Do you mind putting up the slides, Ned?
Hang on a second.
And I don't know if we made it public, but I do want to recognize and thank Carl Wallace as well, because he's going to be helping work on the EAT draft as a co-author. Meanwhile, since we rechartered, I noticed that a lot of our milestones had gotten dropped because we had to insert the new charter. The new charter only included the basically just the co-RIM draft that we wanted to adopt. So with that, what I wanted to do is just list the current drafts and their status. And so let me just go through them really quick. The architecture is still going through the comment ISG evaluation and comment review, and I think that's continuing to proceed. The CHARA and the profile, remote integrity verification, are in the RFC editors queue. So Eric and Guy, I think most of the gating items have gone through. It's just up to the RFC editors to come back and give you the off 48. I think that's where we are with those two drafts. EAT, we just went through. There's still a few more issues, I think, that Ned didn't get to cover. And so we'll expect, and we can re-review once we see a version 15. The attestations results for secure interactions is currently in version 3. From what I noticed in the GitHub, there's still some open issues. Don't know from the authors when we can accept a new version. I'll get to Dave into the bottom just a minute, so let me just keep going through. We just recently adopted both the EAT media types and the co-RIMs, so it's good to see that some of the feedback have been reflected in the GitHub issues. Direct anonymous attestation, haven't really gotten an update there. It's still under version 1. It would be good if we had more reviews and figured out whether it's mature enough to do an early working group last call. So one of the chairs will reach out to the authors there. For the network device subscription, we're still awaiting the results from the Yang review. If we can get participants here to also provide feedback, would be great on that draft. The unprotected COT draft, the co-authors, including myself, are still working on it. We should get it mature sometime soon. I need to caucus with the co-authors there. Interaction models, we're up to version 6 on that. I didn't see any open issues, so we need to reach back to the authors to see if we should issue an early working group last call on that. We've had discussions on the trust anchor stores and the e-collection types. I put out a call for interest. We received enough interest, especially for the trust anchor stores. What I was really hoping for was to have discussion also whether the group felt that it should be up leveled to another working group versus RATS. There was only one positive feedback that we needed to move on this draft, and RATS was as good a group as any. So with that, if we have time, Ned, we can do a poll to see if we can do a call for adoption on that draft here, and then we can confirm on the mail list. I don't know if Thomas is on the call. I think, yeah, he's not on the call. He mentioned he would be providing some feedback on the e-collection types as well, which we've had a few comments on it, but I'd like to gauge better interest. So please chime in on the mail list on interest on the collection type before I can gauge, and feedback on the draft, whether it's ready to be adopted is what I mean. So before we do the call for adoption, let me just go to the next slide, Ned, and go through the updated. So when we rechartered, we said we would adopt the quorum, and we had it listed as adoption in July, which we've done, but then it said that we would do a working group last call this November and we'd be done in March, which I think may be too early. So my proposal is to push those out to March. And I'm putting all of the current drafts that we're working on to see if we can do a proposed working group last call in November. So authors of those drafts, if you feel you won't be ready, let the chairs know. And then I just gave it 6 months from the working group last call to react to those comments before we can go to ISG publication. And then the 2 drafts that we've been discussing that still need adoption are the concise trust anchor stores and e-collection. Okay, I just realized we're out of time. So maybe what I'll do, since we're out of time, is I'll put the call for adoption on the trust anchor stores, and please, everybody, respond in favor or not and provide feedback on the trust anchor stores. With that, I'll pause and see if, go ahead, Ned.
Dave's on the queue and we're over time. So.
Process point for Nancy. By the way, I'm a huge fan of the concise trust anchor stores. I want it adopted. I was the one that said, I'm not sure this working group is the best place for it. If it is here, that's okay. But my current reading of the charter is it required a charter update. It's actually less in scope than the CORIM one, which I didn't think required a charter update, but Roman did. And so before you put out the call, before you conclude the call for adoption, you may want to check with our AD and see if we want to update the charter, if that one's going to be adopted in this working group, because my reading is you can't actually adopt it in this working group without the charter change.
Thanks for that clarification, Dave. So I'll have to go back and reread the recharter to double check on scope. But that's a great point. Thanks. Okay, I think with that, we're out of time.
Okay, so we'll close the meeting then. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Better, Nancy.
Thanks.
Very much.